would you introduce yourself a little bit? Who are you in terms of why the governor would appoint you to this panel?
Well, I am, my name is Louis Picker, and I'm a professor here at OHSU, and my specialty is vaccine development, innovations in vaccine development. I've been here for about 20 years, associate director of the Vaccine and Gene Therapy Institute, and I run a very big laboratory that works primarily on HIV vaccines and tuberculosis vaccines. I am not actively engaged in COVID-19 vaccine development, but I'm very familiar with the vaccines that are being that are out there and are being developed, mainly because the vaccine backbones that are used are vaccine backbones that many were originally developed for HIV, and I'm familiar with them in that context. In terms of OHSU, which I guess would indicate for Oregon, I'm one of the more senior vaccine researchers in the state, and I think that underlies why I was selected for this committee.
That's interesting to hear that. I did not know that the what did you call it? I was going to call it the mechanism for delivering the vaccine.
Well, yeah, the vaccine backbones themselves.
Oh, backbone. Okay, backbone. That's the word you use. So I didn't know that was part of how they were developed was for HIV or tuberculosis. And it kind of goes to one of my questions, which is, there's been decades of, I saw that you were an HIV researcher. We've had decades to develop a vaccine for HIV.
Yeah.
And we don't have one. And yet we have one within a year for COVID-19. Can you
that's
explain
pretty
that
interesting.
bit?
It's actually quite easy to explain. And when you think about it, when somebody gets HIV, there have been tens of millions who have gotten HIV. Nobody clears it. Nobody is, the immune system of humans aren't able to control and clear HIV. Sometimes they can control it, but mostly not, but they never clear it. They never get rid of it. So it is so every pathogen, every virus or every pathogenic bacteria has its own little world. It has its own interactions with our immune systems. And HIV is one that's really hard because it's adapted to evade the immune system, and it's very good at it. So getting an HIV vaccine requires us to develop a vaccine that elicits an immune response that is better than nature. That's not true for COVID-19 or SARS. For that, because that virus very clearly is controlled by the immune system. I mean, there's been millions of people infected, and most of them will self-clear the infection. And so right from the beginning, it was obvious to those of us in the know that this would be a pathogen that would likely be highly susceptible to vaccine-induced immunity. It is not adapted to persist and cause a chronic infection. It's really just a matter of getting the protection sooner so that you could prevent people from getting the severe disease that is associated with all the mortality and morbidity.
So, in the coming weeks, healthcare workers are expected to have access to these vaccines. Mm-hmm. If you were a healthcare worker on the front line,
absolutely. Put my arm out right now. I put my arm out right now. I mean, after these committee, if it's approved, and I expect it will be. I'm familiar with a lot of what's happening already. I expect the data will show that these vaccines are highly efficacious and safe. And yes, I will. And both my family and myself will be lined up for the vaccines as soon as we're eligible to get them.
Okay, and I was just going to ask, just to break down that decision a little bit more, what risks are you weighing? You've already said, something we can't know is the long-term risk. You're weighing that against, the risk of getting COVID. What would be a red flag for you in the data that's publicly presented from these manufacturers?
I think you asked me the first question. I mean, if there were a set of conditions that seem to be associated with the vaccine and not the placebo, that were repeated. You remember a few months back, there was a report in case of transverse myelitis, which is a pretty significant outcome that with one of the vaccines. And these things happen just occasionally, and if it happens to one person, it probably doesn't mean much because that could just be something that would have happened anyway. But if you start seeing repeated serious things like that with a vaccine, then you get concerned, and that's not necessarily something that can be predicted or even understood. A lot of times we wouldn't understand until later why somebody would have this kind of an effect. But if I saw something like that, that would be a red flag for me. Sorry, my lights went off. A red flag for me with regard to that particular vaccine. Remember, all these vaccine backbones, the different classes of vaccines are different. They could have very different, even though they're all targeted to protect you against COVID, that doesn't mean that their side effects are going to be the same. I mean, the Ad26 based vaccine for Johnson & Johnson is very different than the RNA based vaccine for Moderna and for BioNTech or Pfizer. So, that's the whole reason why we have multiple vaccines in place, so that if one of them did have an idiosyncratic or unusual safety feature, we'd still have others and others behind them that wouldn't have that issue. So hopefully what we'll see over the next few weeks is that all of these vaccines will work, and there won't be any of those, at least in the 30,000 or however many people they measured it in, any of those concerning conditions that seem to be attributed to the vaccine.
How much of how remarkable is it that a vaccine was developed this quickly? How long how fast have vaccines in the past been?
10 years. I mean, the fastest one I think before was maybe 6. I mean, this is very fast. Very fast indeed. So, it's a sort of a coming together of technology that has been in development for a long time for other reasons. Investment in the vaccine enterprise. I mean, the fact that there's a Vaccine and Gene Therapy Institute that was invested in by OHSU 20 years ago. The fact that there's a vaccine research center at the NIH that was invested in by the federal government 20 years ago. Those decisions are now bearing fruit because the expertise is there to be able to do this.
Oh, I guess I have one more question. As soon as I say I have last question, it's my mind.
That's okay.
Faster. So is there any research that's been done this last year that will come back to tuberculosis and HIV that might make it faster, better, or, an effective vaccine for those conditions?
Well, the scientific hurdles that we still have to get over with HIV and TB are still going to be there. They don't care about COVID. But what I hope happens is that the COVID example shows that what can be done, and gives a new imperative to do things faster than they've been done in the past. It's easy to get, Bill, because we've been looking for an HIV vaccine for 30 years. It's easier to lose that imperative. But I hope what this does is supercharges that imperative to say that, that we still haven't, that was last century's pandemic that's still here. We need to get rid of it. And we need to get rid of tuberculosis, which is an age-old pandemic that still has killed more people this year than COVID. And people that, if anything, recognizes that infectious diseases are still out there and are still deadly, and we need to keep up our vigilance and our research to take care of them and to be prepared for the next pandemic, which is certainly going to come.
And so is what's needed like massive federal investment, like, international investment in vaccines, or,
I think continued and increased investment in the science of vaccines and infectious diseases is certainly warranted. I mean, but here you have to say that I am definitely conflicted because I'd be one of the ones competing for those funds. But I think res ipsa loquitur, the facts speak for themselves. If we hadn't had this enterprise to do this we wouldn't be looking at potential emergency approval of a vaccine this week, with this pandemic. I mean, it's been truly amazing, and I think the scientific establishment has really come to the rescue.